Or is this full-time MMA now?
I love full-time MMA right now.
Back to the daily grind, and shout out to the full-time patrons. Make sure to hit subscribe if you're new and hit thumbs up if you're not a baby back bagel biting bitch boy, cause you know what time it is. It's full-time
MMA.
And it looks like Daniel Cormier, like many others, believe Alexander Gustafsson might have been ducking his taco at UFC 227 because now he's got this injury that we haven't heard about, and now we hear about it after Anthony Lionheart Smith calls him out with a brutal knockout over Shogun. And he said, Alexander Gustafsson, I'm coming for you, UFC 227. And we were all ready for the fight, not only because Anthony Lionheart Smith has bursted into the top 5 with that win, but also because Alexander Gustafsson needed an opponent. And Alexander Gustafsson was originally scheduled to face Volkan Ozdemir at UFC 227. Hell, originally there was being targeted a Luke Rockhold fight, but Luke Rockhold was injured, so Volkan Ozdemir was going to fill in to fight Gustafsson at 227. Volkan Ozdemir injured. So now Alexander Gustafsson needed a new opponent, and we heard that the UFC offered him a fight with Khalil Roundtree. I didn't even hear about the offer of Jan Blachowicz, but it seems like the UFC has still been offering Alexander Gustafsson fights for UFC 227. Now it seemed like we had the perfect opponent in Anthony Lionheart Smith. He just got a huge win over Shogun, and Daniel Cormier said if Shogun won, he was interested in fighting Shogun for the title. So Shogun definitely was a guy that could have been fighting for the title soon, but since Anthony Lionheart Smith beat Shogun, he's not necessarily the same name, so maybe DC not as interested in fighting Anthony Smith, and that's something we could talk about as well. Shoot, Daniel Cormier was saying he was willing to fight Shogun for the light heavyweight belt. I mean, you know, now he's not going to fight Gustafsson. Well, maybe what about Anthony Smith versus Daniel Cormier? You said Shogun got the title shot, and after what Anthony Smith did to Shogun, I think he takes the place of anything Shogun was about to do. Now, I can understand DC maybe just wanting like Shogun because he was a bigger name, like a legendary name to have on his resume before he retires. So maybe that's why he was willing to fight Shogun. But still, Anthony Smith, I feel like deserved, if not a #1, if not a title fight in place of Shogun, he definitely earned a #1 contender fight against Alexander Gustafsson, who needed an opponent. Now, with that being said, after he got the win over Shogun, he called out Gustafsson, and then come to find out Gustafsson has this injury. And it's not a major injury, it's definitely just a minor injury. Hell, it might have even been an injury Gustafsson could have fought through because the UFC was still offering him fights, and if Gustafsson had some major injury, I think he would have already been announced off of this card. But now he's pulling out, his team's pulling out, and honestly, it could be a strategic move. You know, I'm sure he does have a minor injury. A lot of fighters have injuries coming into their fights. How significant are they? Are they minor? Are they major? I mean, a lot of fighters still fight through it. So for it to be a minor injury and the UFC to still be offering Gustafsson fights, I definitely see why people believe that Gustafsson is ducking, but I don't think he's scared in this sense. I think he might just be looking at it like looking for a title fight. You know what I'm saying? If he's going to be fighting Anthony Smith or a short notice opponent at UFC 227, it's probably just going to be a regular fight. I believe UFC 220, yeah, it's already got 2 title fights. TJ Dillashaw and Demetrius Johnson are going to be defending their belts, so Gustafsson can't get a title fight no matter what, whoever he fights there. And so to fight a short notice opponent, kind of a high risk, low reward. So maybe he is ducking in the sense of not wanting to take the risk there. But I think if it was for a title, Gustafsson would fight any of these guys. And I think that you have to give Gustafsson the benefit of the doubt, because it's not like he's turning down one guy. Like, oh, he saw Anthony Smith's fighting style and he's like, oh, I won't fight that guy. He also turned down the fight with Khalil Roundtree and Jan Blachowicz. And, you know, so it looks like Gustafsson is trying to get closer to the title fight, which he already kind of earned, some people feel, whenever he knocked out Glover Teixeira in the 5th round with that triple uppercut. He could have got the title fight, but Ozdemir got the vote. So Gustafsson is a guy that could be fighting for the title, and he had a top-ranked opponent in Volkan Ozdemir. All of these other guys that are being offered to Alexander Gustafsson, they're not necessarily top-ranked opponents, or they're not fights that are gonna guarantee him a title fight. Alexander Gustafsson was already the #1 contender. Now, if he would have fought Ozdemir, that's the #2 contender. The rest of these guys, I mean, you got Khalil Roundtree. He was just beat Gokhan Saki, very impressive first-round knockout. Got a lot of momentum from that fight, but I believe he might still be unranked. Jan Blachowicz, I believe he just cracked the top 5, so he's a top 5 guy. But also, Alexander Gustafsson beat Jan Blachowicz before he beat Glover Teixeira. But Alexander Gustafsson hasn't been like very active as the #1 contender. But sometimes you see that when divisions are log jammed. I mean, sometimes you see guys like in the lightweight division right now, the division's a little log jammed, but you don't see this. You still see Poirier and Alvarez getting in there and fighting. They're not just waiting on a title shot. You know, they're actually fighting to make their case for the next title shot. But sometimes when the division is log jammed up, it does take motivation away from some of these guys like Alexander Gustafsson. It's like, I could fight one of these guys, but if DC doesn't ever come back to light heavyweight, I mean, I might have to fight someone else anyways, you know? So if they're not really desperate for money, or if they really want that title fight, sometimes they will wait for the opportunity. And lucky for Alexander Gustafsson, he actually might not have to wait too long, man. And maybe his team is looking at that, because this is a minor injury. And if it was, like I said earlier, if it was like a super serious injury, I think they would have already said this, and the UFC probably wouldn't be offering them all these fights. Now, it's unfortunate for Gustafsson that this minor injury is being revealed right after that Anthony Smith knockout and call out, because it makes Alexander Gustafsson look like he's ducking. But, like I said, Alexander Gustafsson, one of the best light heavyweights in the world. It's going to be hard for me to say he's ducking any of these guys. And he turned down 3 different guys. It's not like he's just turning down one specific fighting style. He's either injured or he's looking to get closer to the title fight. Whichever reason it is, UFC 228 is coming up, and they need a title fight. So now you got Daniel Cormier saying that he's not going to fight Alexander Gustafsson. He's pretty much telling him, now I'm never going to fight you before I retire. So what does that mean? Does that mean DC should be stripped, or should we see an interim title fight? Either way, whether it's interim or undisputed, I think we could see Alexander Gustafsson fighting for a light heavyweight title sometime in the future, especially with UFC needing a title fight for UFC 228. They've already tried a couple things that haven't worked. I mean, we've had Nunes versus Cyborg that, you know, they want for that card, but Nunes isn't ready. We've got, most recently, we had Darren Till versus Tyron Woodley talked about for UFC 228, because Colby Covington can't fight that soon, so they were talking about stripping Colby. So the UFC needs a title fight for UFC 228, and that's right after 227. So maybe Gustafsson can fight in an interim title fight there. Now, who would you guys like to see? My vote is Anthony Smith, but I know one person it won't be. It won't be Daniel Cormier, who talked about potentially fighting Shogun or defending his light heavyweight title. But Daniel Cormier, this is what he had to say to Alexander Gustafsson after hearing about his injury, and after the Anthony Smith call out. Daniel Cormier said, "Dear Alex, I don't know what happened to you going back to the Rockhold situation. You have always been a stand-up guy, but your behavior changed. From calling a guy out the day after he got knocked out to now offering to fight me, knowing I have a broken hand after Vulcan couldn't go. Now you've turned down Jan, turned down Khalil, all while calling for a heavyweight title fight. Now, moments after Anthony Smith does his work like an animal, you decide you're hurt. Man, I respect you as a fighter. I'll always be grateful for October 2015. But you and I won't share the octagon again. I'm disappointed in who you've become. You're so entitled, man. I can't deal with delusional people. Good luck recovering. Our time has passed. See you from the commentary table. DC." So Daniel Cormier now has his official reasoning for not giving Alexander Gustafsson a title fight. He's looking at this like, come on, you got to be willing to step up, fight on short notice. He's not showing that. He's trying to sit out, and on top of that, he feels maybe a little offended that Gustafsson has been coming after his teammate Luke Rockhold right after he got knocked out. And so DC's just losing a little respect for Gustafsson the person, not necessarily the fighter, but the person. And that's why I don't think Gustafsson is ducking any of these guys, because I respect him as a fighter. He had a great fight with the former champion and one of the greatest fighters of all time, John Jones, and Daniel Cormier. I mean, Alexander Gustafsson's definitely one of the best light heavyweights in the world, but he just hasn't, been able to get that title. and maybe he will before his career's over. Who knows? But if he does, it won't be in a fight versus Daniel Cormier. And honestly, though, one thing I have to bring up, just as somebody that's been keeping up with the sport, like a lot of you probably have as well. Some of you might not remember this. Some of you might. But DC honestly hasn't ever been super open to a Gustafsson rematch in the first place. DC's a guy that's got his mind on the bag right now. I mean, he's thinking about the biggest fights possible before he retires. And if not the biggest money fights, maybe legacy fights. That's why he was open to potentially fighting Shogun. I mean, that might have been a decent payday, probably more than Gustafsson, because Gustafsson and Daniel Cormier have fought before, and DC has brought up the fact we didn't do great pay-per-view numbers. So Daniel Cormier, on top of losing maybe a little respect for Gustafsson personality-wise, he also doesn't do great business with Gustafsson, and DC in his last 2 fights, that's one thing he is trying to do. Great business. That's why he's fighting Brock Lesnar, and that's why he's open probably to fighting John Jones again, on top of wanting to, get one back on John Jones. But still, DC wants some money, man. It is what it is. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments. Daniel Cormier is guaranteed Gustafsson that they'll never fight again. And I'm not even going to tell you guys. I'm just going to show you guys. You guys know what it is. Shout out to Yank My Dandy Doodle, and to everybody that considers hitting that button in the description box. Let the full-time family know what you think in the comments.
Da 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 da! It's the motherfucking DOWG!